Grow a Podcast. I'm your host, Randy Wilburn, and I'm excited to be with you today. This is my first time doing a virtual training my first time period doing a training with the Fayetteville Public Library, and I'm really, really excited to bring you this topic and discussion today. I think you're going to like what I have to share. At least I hope you will. And for those of you that have never thought about or have been ruminating in your head about doing a podcast but weren't sure where to start, my goal in the next 90 minutes or a little bit less will be to kind of push you along and nudge you down that road to doing a podcast, because I think it's one of the most enriching experiences that I've ever been through, and I hope that you find it the same. So obviously, a million podcasters can't be wrong. I'll get a little into statistics in a second, but podcasting as a medium, as a form, is growing by leaps and bounds. And one of the reasons why I came up with this particular program was I wanted to collaborate with the Fayetteville Public Library, which in my estimation is the best library on the planet. Of course, I'm biased. I'm sure some of you guys are biased, but I'm excited to see the expansion of this library, the expansion of all of the new bells and whistles that we will be able to take advantage of in the coming months. So at the time of recording this in August of 2020, we're still in the midst of this pandemic, but there's still a lot of really great things happening. And so when the library is fully able to open up 100%, I cannot wait to experience that. So part of the reason that I created this particular presentation was to get those that do want to do a podcast or to think about, creating some type of vlogging or some type of video log, that we would give you a little bit of information and some food for thought as you prepare to step out into this, into the region of podcasting. And I know it's still new for a lot of people, but for those of you that have been listening to podcasts for around, it's exciting that this opportunity is available to us. And it's great that the Fayetteville Public Library has created a program internally within the library that's going to make a number of things available to everyone to use. And I'll go through those at the end or closer to the end of this presentation. But again, I'm just excited to be here to talk about what the Fayetteville Public Library has to offer as it pertains specifically to podcasting, and to get you thinking about that. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to go through a couple of these things, and I wanted to put this up front. This is a disclaimer. This is not a wholesale how to do a podcast from start to finish. This is more how to get you guys an understanding of podcasting, what it's all about, to help you kind of figure out exactly what you want to do when it comes to podcasting, what that means for you. Some of you listening to this may already know exactly what you want to podcast about, have already put the plans in works, and I think that's great. I'm going to talk to you about some of the things that you're going to need to think about purchasing before you get started. And also, I want to make this as simple as possible for people, because I think that, like anything, podcasting shouldn't be an expensive affair. I think it should be something that you could do that could be somewhat low tech, but at the same time, you could produce a really good program that people want to actually listen to. So today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the brief history of podcasting. It's only been around since 2004. We're going to share some podcasting stats. We're going to talk about bringing your podcast idea to life. And we're going to focus on a couple of small things within that. Your why. Why do you want to do it in the first place? Who is your audience? Who is that ideal avatar? Who would you be creating this podcast for besides yourself? And what is the structure of your podcast? Is it going to be a solo show? Is it going to be a interview style show? Will you have a co-host? Will it be an ensemble? And then of course the length of the show is important to consider as well. I also put this up there, and it's a little tongue in cheek, but I say to people all the time when they ask me, well, Randy, what do you think about podcasting? How much does it really cost? I tell people, don't obsess about the equipment. Sound is important. Don't get me wrong, I'm an audiophile. I am a sound snob, but for very little money, you can make things sound amazing. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, and I'll make sure that you guys have my contact information should you have additional questions. And we possibly may do another episode that will go a little deeper into the nuances of how do you make your podcast sound amazing? How do you keep people coming back to listen to your podcast on a regular basis? And then I want to specifically go over, because they're the ones that are hosting this, what will be available at the Fayetteville Public Library once the extension to the library opens up in the coming months. So if you're listening to this and this is after the fact and the library is already open, these items should be available to you. And so you should certainly make yourself available to them to be able to use. And that's the one thing I do want to say. I really appreciate the library. I have a podcast, and I don't want to get into who I am. I mean, I'm just a guy that lives in Fayetteville with my wife and 3 kids. But the more important thing is that I've been a podcaster for almost a decade. I've got 600 plus episodes under my belt. And one of the things that I did in the recent past, I'd say maybe in the last year, was created a new podcast because I wanted to try something different. And that podcast is called I Am Northwest Arkansas. It focuses on the intersection of business, culture, entrepreneurship, and life in the Ozarks. And I really did that podcast because I wanted to meet new people. I wanted to find out more about this area because I spent more time on an airplane and more time at XNA Airport than I did physically in Fayetteville, Rogers, Springdale, and Bentonville. So I decided to create a podcast. And I'll get into all of that in a second, but that's why I'm here today talking to you about this. I've done a number of podcasts. I've done a variety of different shows for a variety of different reasons. And so I hope to be able to lend some credibility to the process, but also just to kind of encourage you. I think that's the most important thing, is that we need to be encouraged about this process and not allow the technical aspect of podcasting to get in the way of the message that you're trying to get across to individuals. So here's a brief history of podcasting. And again, like I said, podcasting has been around since 2004. And a gentleman named Adam Curry created it along with a guy named Dave Weiner. They created this thing called iPodder. And that was the first version of the podcast. And for many of you that are old enough to remember, if you're saying, well, that Adam Curry name sounds familiar, I remember an MTV VJ named Adam Curry. It is one and the same person. Yes, that same Adam Curry that had those curly locks of hair, for those of us that grew up on MTV, that's the same guy. And he created podcasting along with Dave Weiner. And certainly it's been a pretty amazing ride from there. In 2005, iTunes created a release that supported podcasting. George Bush in 2005 became the first president to deliver his weekly address in the form of a podcast. And you can read it from there. I'm not going to go through all of that. I think there's some key things to remember. When Steve Jobs created the iPhone, it demonstrably leveled the playing field for how easily accessible podcasts would be. And he saw the benefit of it. I mean, of course, we had the iPod and all this other stuff, but the iPhone, having that physical phone in your pocket where I can create ideas and record them and share them with the world. And any one of you listening here, any of your family members, anybody else around the country can take that information and listen to it and subscribe to it and download it and play it on in a time shifted manner whenever they want to take it in is really, to me, one of the powers of podcasting. And so it just continued to grow. Apple really supported it. They created a program called GarageBand, which allowed them to create, to easily edit and create podcasts right on the Apple computers. So whether you have a MacBook Pro or an iMac or anything like that, and yes, I'm guilty as charged. I'm an Apple fanboy. I love Mac. Windows has options as well, and I'm going to talk a little bit about both of those. So I'm not going to play preference to one or the other. The bottom line is, no matter what type of computer that you have, you can easily edit and control and put out a great podcast. And then the last thing I'll point out here is that by 2013, Apple had announced that they had 1 billion podcast subscribers. And then more importantly than that, in 2019, 165 million people have listened to a podcast. And and on average, 90 million Americans listen to podcasts on a monthly basis. So that's almost a third of our population here in the United States. And so I think that's kind of interesting to consider. And I'm going to ask a question to the audience in a second. And of course, if you have any questions or anything that you want to learn about or ask, feel free to post those questions there, and I'll try to try to check them out and answer as many as I can. And that way we can definitely I can definitely answer whatever questions that you have. So hold on one second. Did not mean to do that. All right. Window. All right. Okay. Can you, I just want to make sure you guys can still see the main screen. I just, for some reason, I lost it for a second there, and I hate to.
Randy, I see what looks like the inside of a fireworks display.
Okay. Yeah. That does look like that. That's not what, hold on one second. Why is this?
It's very pretty.
Yes, it is. It is very pretty, but that's not what I wanted people to see. Hold on one second, because I'm sharing this screen and all right. All right, preferences. I apologize about this, folks. I moved one thing, and all of a sudden, I just lost the screen that I was sharing with you guys. All right. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. Okay, I think you can see that now. If you can confirm that with me, I'd appreciate it.
I can see it just fine.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, so back to what I said. Sorry for the snafu there. The bottom line is that I guess the long and short of it is from 2004 to 2020 to present day, we've been 16 years and podcasting has just grown considerably. So here are some stats just for you to think about. Approximately 169 million Americans listened to online audio in the last week. This research was done just last month by Edison Research, and they do the major research on podcasting in general. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And they said that these individuals spend an average of over 15 hours doing so. I can certainly attest to that. I'll be interested to find out what some of you guys think, because I think that there's such a growth of podcasting that everybody and their mother is taking advantage of it. So these statistics don't surprise me. Another observation is that monthly podcast consumers grew by 16% year over year, cresting 100 million Americans for the first time in this past year. So that's huge. So that means that year over year, especially in the past few years, that the growth of podcasting has just basically blown through the roof. I mean, just a few years ago, I think it was like less than 50 million people had listened or consumed a podcast here in the United States. And that number has grown to about, 75 million are aware of are listening to podcasts on a regular basis. So the numbers continue to grow. And I only share this because I really want to encourage you that this is still in its early stages. When you think about podcasting, and when you think about like comparing it to the number of YouTube channels, for those of you that watch YouTube, YouTube channels there's millions and millions of YouTube channels, whereas we have just hit 1 million podcast programs, right? So each individual podcast. So like I personally run 2 podcasts, and then I manage podcasts for several clients. And so that, I'm personally responsible for 6 podcasts right now, and I'm just one individual, but that's going to grow over time. And so there's a lot of opportunity for those of you guys to really take advantage of this. And so I was curious to know, what is your favorite podcast? Those of you that are particularly on this call, I would love it if you would share with me what you guys listen to, what really does it for you from a podcasting perspective.
I am unmuting everyone right now so they can answer you.
Yeah, I love to hear people's voices. That's great. So you guys are open. I think everyone has been unmuted. So I'd love for you to tell me what your favorite podcast is.
Hi, I'm Ariel, and I like to listen to podcasts like Every Little Thing.
Oh yeah,
just kind of informative, random, fun to listen to.
Okay, Every Little Thing. I love that. Perfect. Thank you. You said Marielle?
Ariel.
Sorry about that. Got you.
Yeah, you're good.
Ariel. Okay, thank you. Anybody else like Ariel that likes Every Little Thing?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Gimlet Media. My name is Bryson, by the way.
Hey, Bryson, how are you, man? Yeah,
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for bearing with me with some of the technical issues. Yeah, Gimlet Media
no
is great. They put on a host of shows. What specifically from Gimlet do you like?
Oh man, I've listened to a lot of them and they're great. I think probably my favorite is Heavyweight.
Okay, yeah, that's a good one. That is a good one. So.
But even some of their, like, I guess almost like radio dramas like Homecoming are really good too.
That's all. I was hoping you'd say that.
Oh man, yeah. Homecoming had me hooked. So good. It's great.
Oh my gosh, you don't understand, and I think that's important. So I get excited when I hear that. Anybody else have a favorite podcast they'd like to share? Thanks for that, Bryson.
Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else? It's okay.
I like some of the true crime ones.
Oh yeah, of course. So true crime.
Yeah.
So there was Monster, which came out recently, which kind of retold the whole story of the Atlanta child murders. Mm-hmm. There's been several on the Black Dahlia murder from back in the late 40s in LA. All the true crime is really, really good. I think, and I'm glad that Ariel and Bryson mentioned those. Here's the thing. There are going to be podcasts that stand on their own by themselves, and then there are going to be podcasts that are created through organizations. So like when you hear about Gimlet Media, there are a lot of organizations that have come together to say, you know what, we're going to create our own group of podcasts. And what happens is, if you listen to one Gimlet show, the chances of you finding another is really good. And so there's something to be said for all these syndicated programs that are now coming out on podcasts. And of course, NPR they've done a really great job of it. I mean, NPR basically rules the roost when it comes to podcasting. I've spent time with some of those folks, and they really have it down pat. But I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. I did want to just kind of get to find out what some of your favorite podcasts are, because I think it's important for us to think about that when we go into thinking about what we want to create for ourselves, right? I mean, because again, you don't have to. I mean, you'd be surprised how small of an operation you can have and still put out a really super successful podcast. And so I just really want to encourage you that maybe somebody listening to this and the encouragement that you might get today from this particular program and having access to all the great facilities and items that the library has available to you, that you create one of the next big podcasts, So, and I'll talk a little bit later on about some of the biggest of the big and how they have impacted the medium, because it is profound for sure. So, all right, so let's talk about some of the top 10 podcasts as of July 2020. So there you got the Daily. That's my go-to podcast I listen to every day. It's from the New York Times. I grew up outside of New Jersey, so outside of New York City. So I've been reading the New York Times all my life. So when the Daily came out, I was like, oh, great. I don't have the time to read the New York Times, but I do have the time to listen to the Daily. So daily shows can run an average of anywhere from about 17, 18, 19 minutes long to about 35 minutes long. And sometimes they'll talk about a specific issue of the day. Sometimes they'll reflect on a much larger show, or I'm sorry, a much larger article that was done recently in the New York Times. Hence, that's how the 1619 Project came about. Hannah Nicole Jones was writing the 1619 Project as a long form article, and then they put it in the Daily. Then it became its own podcast. So that's an interesting way on how a podcast can spin off. Of course, you have NPR NewsHour, Up First from NPR, Call Her Daddy from Barstool Sports, which is a hilarious podcast. I highly recommend that you check it out. It's silly, but it's fun to listen to. The Ben Shapiro Show from the Daily Wire, Stuff You Should Know from iHeartRadio, which was really, really good. This American Life, which produces This American Life and Serial, and Serial, being that podcast that came out back in 2013 when they did a podcast on the murder of a young girl named Hae Min Lee, who was supposedly murdered by one of her classmates. But Serial actually shed light on people having real doubts about the person that is actually in jail for her murder. And so, it kind of took on a life of its own. And then at that point, that's when they actually started parodying podcasting on TV, because after Serial came out, they did a Serial plug on Saturday Night Live. And, so this medium has really grown. Of course, you got Dateline NBC, Pardon My Take from Barstool Sports, which is another really good podcast. And then one of my favorites, Planet Money from NPR. So, I mean, NPR, if you look at the top 20, NPR has like two-thirds, or not, but more than half of the shows are from NPR. They just put together a really, really good podcast product. I mean, their radio is amazing as it is. And so they are ones that said, we're not going to let this podcasting thing pass us by. We're going to make the transfer from radio to the podcasting format. And they've done a really good job of that. And we've seen that here locally with Ozarks at Large. Kyle Kellums, whose office is right across the street from the Fayetteville Public Library. Big shout out to Kyle. They do a great job with repurposing a radio show for podcasting. So that's a thing that you can do as well. So people repurpose video vlogs to podcasts. People repurpose radio shows to podcasts. So there's a lot that you can do with podcasting, and just the medium of voice. It's once you understand and learn how to manipulate audio and do with it whatever you want to do with it, you'll realize that this medium is rich with possibilities. Okay, very much so. So I want you to kind of think of that. And I really wanted to share some of these top 10 podcasts just so you could get an idea of what is possible. And I mean, the numbers on the Daily are just absolutely absurd. I mean, there are more people that listen to the Daily than read the New York Times. So just give you some perspective there. Way more people. So take that for what it's worth. So let's look at the next slide here. Sorry. Go back. Seth Godin, one of my favorite marketers out there. I've seen him speak several times. He said a couple of years ago, podcasting is the new blogging. So for those of you that can remember in the late 90s when blogs just started coming out and people were blogging and WordPress and all that just started out. These guys, podcasting is, blogging came along, and that was a big thing. Then people started doing the video logs or vlogging, and now it's podcasting. And that's kind of the new, it is the new blogging, because as Seth Godin has said, it's so easy to pick up your phone and record your thoughts and share them with other people. Now, podcasting isn't that simple. There's still a couple of other steps in there, but it could be. It could be. And, that's actually how I started out, is just sharing my thoughts. I had a random musings podcast called The Randy Wilburn Show. Go figure. And that was actually pretty popular for me. I had friends listening to it. I had others. And this was several years ago. And you can probably still find it on iTunes. As a matter of fact, I know it is still on iTunes. So if you want to get a laugh and check out some of my early days of podcasting, you can listen to that and then compare it to some of the stuff that I'm doing now. And I like listening to it now because I'm like, wow, I've come so far. But that's like with anything, right? Anybody that just learned to ride a bike today, a year from now, they're going to totally be advanced in how they're able to maneuver and deal with traffic and all that other stuff. So with anything, if you give yourself some time, you can really grow into it. And to me, podcasting is a great medium like that. And it will give you a chance to find your voice. I've tried so many different podcast styles and techniques and approaches and different formats that I've found what I like and what I don't like. So I think that's important for you to really be thinking about as you step out and say, hey, this is what we're going to start next. This is what I'm going to start when it comes to a podcast. So let's talk about bringing your podcast idea to life. And I think this part of it is probably the most important aspect of the whole process, right? Because what I want people to understand is that this podcast, you have an opportunity to share some that are intrinsically important to you, things that really resonate with you. And it might be something that resonates with other people. You just never know. And I think it's why you need to think about just doing your podcast. And originally, when I told David Johnson and the rest of his amazing team there at the Fayetteville Public Library that we should do a program like this, it was to talk about the why behind doing a podcast. And a lot of times we don't really think about that. We're just like, oh, I'm just going to go out and create something and then we'll just see what happens. But I think you need to have a why behind it, because here's the deal. The average person that podcasts typically will stick with it for a certain number of episodes. And after that, they typically fall off, which is why if you go into the iTunes, or if you go look at all the podcasts that are there are a lot of podcasts that were there and started in 2012 and then dropped off the map after 7 or 8 shows. And they're still listed. As long as a server is feeding the information, they're still listed by Apple or Spotify or any of these others. But the reality is that, this is, you have to continue to press record. And that's the theme that I really want everybody to understand, is that if you are going to do this, and you're going to get into this mindset of just continually pressing record, if you have something to share and say, then you need to think about your why. Why are you doing this podcast in the first place? And I think that is really important. So, for me, and I'm going to use myself as an example here, but the reason, again, why I created the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast was essentially just so that I could meet people, and I love telling stories. And it was a chance for me to meet new people and tell their stories. And that's what I've done. So if you listen to my podcast, the format's always the same. We get on, I talk about some things to intro the actual episode, and then I get into the individual superhero origin story, because everybody likes to talk about themselves. Everybody likes to tell their story, and everybody's story, everybody here on this call, everybody listening later on, your story matters. And when you connect with other people and tell their stories, that matters too. And so you need to understand the why behind what type of stories do you want to tell? What really moves you? It might be, maybe, I don't know, maybe you're just passionate about whiskey and the different variations of the way that they use these dry aged barrels to age whiskey. And that's a passion for you. And there are other people out there that would have that same passion. Maybe you like cigars, and I know I'm thinking of two primarily very manly things, but it could be anything. Maybe you like Etsy. Maybe you like to knit. I mean, it doesn't matter. What is your passion? What do you want to create a podcast about? It needs to be something. In order for you to be comfortable about pressing record on a regular basis, it needs to be something that you're passionate about. Don't just say, oh, well, I want to try to talk about this because that just seems to be the popular thing right now. And, maybe I might sell sponsorship to my podcast. And so I want to be kind of in the here and now with this particular topic. That won't last long term. Now, for me, with the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast, I look forward. I can't wait for every new interview that I get to do. And the podcast is an interview format podcast. Every now and then I'll do a mono show where I will talk by myself. But for the most part, it's an interview-based podcast. And I cannot wait until the next person that I interview. So like, for instance, this past week, I interviewed 2 people. Those episodes will come out in the next couple of weeks. Next week, this week, actually, I have like 3 interviews scheduled. Cannot wait for them. I'm so excited to talk to these people because they all come from different walks of life, but they're all talking about the thing that I focus on in the podcast, which is, again, business, culture, entrepreneurship, and life in the Ozarks. And so there's always something new to be learned. So you really got to be thinking about the why. That's really what drives me. So I never get to a place where I'm just, we all physically get tired. I get that. But I never get to a place where I'm just like, I don't really feel like doing this, or I'm going to phone it in. I legitimately enjoy this. And I do believe if you choose a topic or you choose a subject that you're really passionate about. Now, you could be doing something work-related. I've done that too, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But if you're picking something that is pure, that you have a lot of passion for, you'll find that it's much easier for you to press record. So just think of it that way and take that for what it's worth. So I really want you to be thinking about your why and why are we here in the first place. The next thing, and I love this image here, is I want you to be thinking about your avatar. Who is your audience, right? For me, and my audience with this particular podcast was not just myself, right? So the reason why I created the podcast was when I moved here in 2014, I did not know, I knew one person in Northwest Arkansas, and I didn't know a lot about Northwest Arkansas except for Walmart was based here. And that was it. So I decided, you know what? I want to connect with other people that and tell their stories, because there may be other people that hear these stories and are impacted, and it will give them a better perspective of what this area is all about. Because in each episode, we like to talk about why a person is in Arkansas in the first place. Maybe they're a native, maybe they relocated here to come to work for one of the big 3. It could be a number of different reasons. But when I moved here, outside of Dr. Google, I did not have any real frame of reference for what Northwest Arkansas was all about. Now we have this podcast. And in this podcast, when I think about the people that I'm trying to attract to the podcast, I think about the avatar. Who is my ideal listener? My ideal listener is somebody that might be moving here to work with the big 3. Maybe they've relocated here recently. A lot of people relocate to Northwest Arkansas to retire. Did you know that? I mean, a lot of people don't realize that Bella Vista is a huge retirement destination for folks. So, I mean, people come here for a variety of reasons. Now, I thought about all those individuals, and I also thought about people that are here locally, because the best testament that I could ever get is when somebody tells me, man, I've been living here all my life, and I listened to your podcast and I learned something new about the place that I call home. That's when I'm like, wow, okay, great. That's awesome that I was able to reach you as well. And so I think about all the different people, the types of avatars, and you don't necessarily need to have 50 different avatars, but my core avatars are, like I said, that guy or gal that's coming here to work at one of the big 3 or relocating here, maybe a senior that's relocating to Northwest Arkansas, or somebody that already lives here and maybe just needs to expand their horizons and want to find out and learn a little bit more about some of the great programs and events and entities that exist right here under their nose, and they're not even aware of it. So when I'm creating and thinking about these podcast episodes, I think about that avatar. You need to do the same thing. You need to have the ideal listener in your mind and think about what would they want to listen to. So as I was listening and Bryson was sharing about how much he likes Gimlet Media, and he mentioned Heavyweight and Homecoming. And so, you know, in the same way, you know, obviously Bryson is a type of avatar for Gimlet Media. So when they're thinking about the type of stuff that they put out, they're going to put, you know, they're going to think about shows that are going to resonate with that type of audience. Right. And I think it's just important for us to be thinking about that. How am I going to do that? And the thing is, understand this. With a podcast, the beauty of podcasting is that it's fluid. So you don't have to feel like, oh, I can only focus on these types of individuals. You can pivot, you can change a little bit. I've changed some, okay, over the last 16, 17 months that I've done this particular podcast. I've got 82 episodes at the current time that we're recording this. But I've changed a little bit in terms of how I focus, in terms of some of the things that I've talked about. There are a couple of things that I just don't deal with. I don't do politics. I don't get into that. So you have to determine where you will, because I've had people say, hey, I'd like to come on and talk about this, or I'd like to come on and talk about that. If we can marry it under the umbrella of, you know, those things that really make Northwest Arkansas a great place to live, then yes, we'll work it out. But I try not to be partisan or divisive in any way, shape, or form, because just there's other shows out there for that. And that's just not what I do. So you have to really be thinking about who your audience is. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that type of approach or that type of show. I'm just saying, know your audience. If that's what your audience wants, if that's what you're focusing on, then go for it, right? I mean, Tucker Carlson has his audience. Rachel Maddow has her audience. You have to think about who your audience is going to be and then kind of work through that. Now, the next thing is, I want you to think of a structure and the type of show that you want to do, right? And I mentioned that. So when it comes to structure and type of show, we're talking about like, okay, am I going to go out in the field and interview a bunch of people and then bring all those interviews back in and package a show up? Or am I just going to talk? Am I just going to have a monologue where I come up with a topic, I talk about that topic because I feel very strongly about it? And maybe you do. Maybe you like mountain biking and you like to talk about just the sanctity of getting out on the in slaughter pen, or going out and into some of the other, you know, Big Sugar or any of these other places where you can go and ride and just be among nature and just enjoy yourself on a mountain bike. Maybe you want to talk about it that way. Or maybe you want to interview people that spend their time traveling around the country, trying out different mountain bike venues and compare those or contrast those to what we have right here in Northwest Arkansas. Because quiet as it's kept, Northwest Arkansas, or just the natural state in general, has amazing mountain bike trails, right? Or you want to do a co-hosted thing where you and a partner or somebody else has decided, hey, you know what, we could talk about this till the cows come home. Maybe you sit back and drink some Pinot Grigio or drink some cider or something like that and enjoy talking about something. And you say, you know what, this would be a great podcast because I know other people that would love to talk about this. So maybe you do a co-hosted show, or then maybe you do an ensemble where you bring in a bunch of people. And that isn't always easy. If it's an ensemble of the same people over and over again, that would typically be a much easier type of show than if you're going to be each week, you're just going to have brand new people in there. You've got to have a level of control from the interview perspective that will allow you to corral and wrangle an ensemble of people. I do it a fair amount where I'll bring in different people, and sometimes I'll have 3 or 4 people on the show at one time, but I've also been doing this for a while. So my advice to you would simply be, you know, take your time, figure out really what works for you, but how do you want to do it? Some of you guys are saying, you know, I don't want to be bothered with a bunch of other people. I just want to share my thoughts and ideas. And that's perfectly fine. And there are a lot of people out there that have solo shows, and that's all they do is talk for a period of time. And every now and then they might bring somebody in to share information, but for the most part, it's them by themselves. So I think you need to think about that and, you know, how you want to do that. If that works for you, if you want to do a solo show, you have that. If you want to do an interview show, you have that as well. And so you have all these different options. Then you got to think about the time, right? So I told you about the daily. I mean, the daily The Daily is a podcast that comes out literally every day, and some episodes are longer than others. But when you think about a podcast, you have a lot of short form podcasts that are 10 minutes or less. I listen to a podcast called The Daily Stoic, and that podcast is never more than 3 minutes. Period. End of story. It's quick. The guy, I don't know the guy, but I've heard him talk about his podcasting process. But he goes in and he'll record like 30 episodes at a time. And they're all 3 minutes. So maybe he spends a couple hours doing it, but then he can edit it and put it together and add a beginning and an end to the show and put his actual episode in there. And he puts it out. And then he does a whole bunch at a time. Most people that I know, when they create a show, no matter what, they try to batch process their show so that they're not going crazy. So like, for instance, when I do my podcast, I only interview people on Mondays or Tuesdays at specific windows. And outside of that, I don't do any interviewing for that podcast because I'm also working on other things, but it just allows me to batch process the work that I'm doing. And so you want to have some type of order to how you do the podcasting piece of it, because that's going to make a huge difference for you. The next thing is, you could do a medium form show, 20 to 30 minutes. That's where most podcasts fit in that frame of reference, but some are longer than that. So you got long form, which is like 30 to 60 minutes. And I was mentioning Atlanta Monster and some others that I've listened to. Most of those tend to be in the 50 to 60 minute range of an episode. And generally any of the true crime stuff, any good true crime stuff is going to be like 45 minutes to an hour, right? And so those are some of the different time frames that you have. So you have to think about the structure, the type of show that you're going to do, the length of the show, because you don't want to have like, one minute you don't want your podcast episode to be 5 minutes, and then if I subscribe and then I go to the next week, the next episode's a minute. Is an hour and 50 minutes long. Because then it's going to be like all over the place. So you want to have some consistency there with regard to the length of your show. And if it's too long, you can also break it up. That's the beauty. It's editing. It's easy. You can take a really long, an hour and a half long, a really great interview and break it up into a part 1 and part 2. So you have a 45-minute interview, you tease them for the part 2, and then you play the part 2 the next week, or whatever the frequency is of the show that you're trying to produce. So you can work with that. And then, okay, after short form, medium form, and long form, then you've got these guys. And I use Joe Rogan and Dan Carlin as examples. These guys can go. If you're not familiar with them, obviously Joe Rogan, for those of you that used to watch Fear Factor, he's also a comedian. He also does some mixed martial arts stuff, and he's a little bit of everything. But Joe Rogan also does some pretty impressive. He does some pretty impressive podcast episodes, but his podcast can be 3.5 hours long. All right. Now, I know most of you are thinking, Randy, I don't have time in the day to listen to a 3.5 hour podcast. I don't either. But I will admit that he's had some people on his show that I have listened to the whole thing from beginning to end. He had Edward Snowden on this past year, and I was riveted to this podcast. So I don't listen to every Joe Rogan episode, but there are episodes that I do listen to that really resonate with me. And so sometimes I'll break it up and I'll listen to it over the course of a couple of bike rides or a jog or something like that. But again, that's the beauty of podcasting. People can consume it whenever they want to. It's not a video. I don't have to be sitting down to watch it. I can be driving. I can be doing a number of other things and consume this information. Now, for those of you that are history buffs, and I mentioned Dan Carlin because a single Dan Carlin episode can be 6.5, 7 hours or longer. But Dan is an amazing storyteller that tells that basically creates these historically accurate podcasts about historical stuff. I mean, whatever, like he talks about the Roman Empire. He talked about Napoleon. I mean, he's talked about anything major that has happened in history. His whole thing is, why should all of this be relegated to a chapter? I have these unlimited data. I can say as much as I want until I go hoarse, and I can go for it. And that's what he does. And so if you listen to Dan Carlin on history, I mean, you talk about some of the best podcasts that I've ever listened to. And I mean, these guys are both two of the most popular podcasters out there, period. And their podcasts are way beyond the spectrum of anything that I'm talking about in terms of a timeline or reference. And I use these guys for a number of reasons to give an example, because people will say, oh, well, nobody will ever listen to a 3-hour podcast. Well, tell that to Spotify, because they just gave Joe Rogan $100 million to exclusively have his podcast with Spotify. So clearly somebody sees the value in it. And the same thing for Dan Carlin. I mean, he's making good money with his podcast. And I want to be very clear. I haven't brought up money at all, because I don't think anybody should get into podcasting for money. I think if money does come because of your podcast or because of your talent and skill set and ability, then that to me is a plus. And that's basically the world coming back to you and saying, hey, what you have to say really matters. And we've attached an extra value to that. And again, be very clear. Even if you never make $1 from podcasting, what you say matters. So I don't want you to misconstrue what I'm saying. But Joe Rogan and Dan Carlin are a perfect example that you don't have to fit into some nice normal box to do a podcast and have some success with it. So take that for what it's worth. But these guys are both great individuals. And I think that, you know, check out their podcast when you get a chance. Dan's stuff is all historically accurate. As a history major in college, I appreciate that. And as I've listened to, he did an episode on the Black Death, which the plague of during the medieval times. And I mean, it was phenomenal, and talking about the Black Plague. And it was, I would certainly encourage you to just check out both of these guys. And if no other episode that you listen to with Joe Rogan, just go listen to the one with him and Edward Snowden. But he also did one with another really good one with a guy that worked at Area 51. And that was really interesting as well. And so you could go down a rabbit hole with these, but I'll let you be the decider of that, and how much time that you have to spend. But both of these guys are incredibly talented with what they do. And they are a perfect example that you don't have to fit some perfect box in order to do a podcast a certain way. So I hope that will serve as some inspiration for you as you guys start to think about what you want to share and what you want to do. Now, here's the thing, because I know everybody's thinking about, well, Randy, what do I need for equipment? What am I going to do? Or I don't really have the money to spend on all this equipment. And I guess the long and short of it is that you don't need to spend a ton of money on equipment. Again, that's why I say this: don't obsess about the equipment. You can build over time. You can start out with something as simple as your iPhone, and it will work for you. An Android phone will work for you. They both have either really super inexpensive recording apps that you can use, and they have apps that come with the phone that you can use to record your thoughts, your ideas. And then a good microphone will go a long way, but even then, you don't necessarily even need that right away. I know people that have done podcasts on Anchor, which is one of the podcast hosting providers, that all they do is talk into their iPhone and they go from there. And you're none the wiser. I mean, the quality is what it is, but it's not it's not something that would be offensive if you're an audiophile and you like certain quality sound. Now, here's the thing: everybody's not going to sound like NPR out of the box. That I can tell you. So many people strive for that right away, but you're not going to sound like Terry Gross. All right, it's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen for a number of reasons. You're not going to be able to deliver that sound right away. You're not even going to be able to nuance your voice with the inflection, with the tone. Your tonality is really important. All these things, that's stuff that you're going to develop over time, and you can develop it. I mean, this is for me, this is an art. I practice it all the time. I'm constantly working on my voice, my diaphragm, how I deliver. I mean, again, there's so many pieces to it, but just getting started, I just really want people to be in the mindset of pressing record and getting something out there for the world to consume. And then we can Terry Gross it up later. Okay, we can NPR it up later and make you sound super amazing. But just starting out, most of us are carrying around in our pockets what we need in order to get a podcast started. So I really want to encourage you to be thinking of it from that perspective. So, you got an Android phone, you have an Apple phone, that's a great place to start. There are a lot of other items, and I share with you at the end of this presentation a link to see the stuff that I use, both on the podcasting side and on the video side. And I have several $1,000s worth of equipment. I'm not suggesting that anybody has to go out and do that. You can do it for very short money, and you can put out a good product. And a perfect example of that is up there in the far left-hand corner is a Rode lavalier mic, which I own and I carry around with me all the time. And I use that little white dongle that goes to the iPhone, since iPhone likes to take away jacks on their devices. So I connect that to that little white dongle that goes into my iPhone. And sometimes when I want to just record something and I just want a very good sounding presence of my voice, I'll use that lav. That lav mic is like less than $70 on Amazon or anywhere else that you want to use it and find it. Rode is an Australian company. They make some of the best microphones out there, period, end of story. But just to start off with the basics, if it's just you're doing a solo show, you're not, doing a bunch of stuff, you can record it just like that with using that mic right into your iPhone or right into your Android and get started with that. Now, if you want to go a step up, there are two mics that I highly recommend. One is this Samson Q2, and that is a really good mic. And that's a particular kit that comes with that connection there, which connects to your USB on your computer. That way you can run the mic directly through your computer. So it's a USB powered microphone, or you can use those XLR cords, which are the bigger mic cables, and that can plug into, a much more robust switcher or a board that you could plug that mic into. And again, I didn't want to get into talking too much about the equipment because it could be overwhelming, but just as to give you an idea, you don't need a lot to get started. The other microphone that I highly recommend that's basically comparable to that, it's the microphone that I own 4 of. It's called Audio-Technica. Audio-Technica, Samson, Rode, they all make really good mics. The Audio-Technica ATR 2100 is the mic that I started with. It comes with the same kit that you see here. It's just an Audio-Technica mic and not a Samsung mic. And it has a USB connection. It has an XLR connection. And I use that on my podcast on a regular basis, in addition to another mic that I use. So it works really well. When I go out in the field, I carry a couple of those with me if I'm interviewing multiple people. And then, you have plenty of options. So, that's the beauty of this. And then you can use a windscreen like you see there to help you avoid some of the plosives that come out. So like a lot of times people pop their P's and you hear it popped on a recording, and that's a plosive. And so when you can avoid plosives by having that windscreen on your mic, that will help out with the wind, and it will also help out with plosives. They also have these things called pop filters, which also allow you to avoid the popping of P's in certain words that you might say, to avoid that. Because when you pop a P on a mic, it gets really loud really quickly and it spikes the meter. So that's what you want to avoid. Now, at the bottom here are two things. One is the GarageBand logo for Apple. That is for those of you that own a MacBook and have never touched GarageBand, that's what that's there for. That is an editor kit system that you can use. You don't need to buy anything to edit your podcast. You can do it all right on GarageBand. There are a ton of YouTube videos that walk you through how to edit your podcast on GarageBand. If I showed you, and hopefully we'll be able to do a follow-up to this where I can kind of walk you through the ease with which you can take a show from the actual recording of it into GarageBand and export it out at a level and a quality that you can then send to your podcast host, you'd be amazed. And Audacity is another really great program for those of you that are on Windows devices. Audacity is free, capital Free, and it's one of the best, if not the best, free, what they call DAWs or digital audio workstations that's out there. And Audacity is amazing. Highly recommend it. I've used it before just because I wanted to learn how to use it, but it's really easy. And again, Audacity has a ton of YouTube channels, YouTube videos that will walk you through the basics of editing in Audacity. So, but this just kind of gives you an idea of how simple it can be for you to start a podcast. And I know that some of you guys are going to have some questions about this, and I'm going to take those questions. So just be thinking about your questions, because I am leaving time at the end for Q&A. Now, I want to just explain one last thing to you before we move on to the final section. Is your podcast has to be hosted somewhere. Just like a website has to be hosted somewhere, your podcast needs to be hosted somewhere. And I would never recommend that you host your podcast where you host your website, because of the amount of data that is used. And you want to make sure you're using a server that is geared towards podcasting and it's geared towards high bandwidth. And so all of these different providers here, and I don't necessarily want to speak on one over the other, but you've got Blueberry, Buzzsprout, Castos, Podiant, Podbean, Simplecast, Libsyn, SoundCloud, Spreaker. Those are all hosts. So all of these guys will host your podcast. So you pay them a small fee, and they've got really, small charges to get started, but you can do your podcast. Once you create it and edit it, then you push it up to a host. So now I can speak specifically about Buzzsprout, SoundCloud, and Libsyn. Libsyn I have worked with for over a decade. They're an outstanding company. They are probably the largest podcast host, period. They're based out of Pittsburgh. They just know what they're doing. They're really, really good. Buzzsprout, though, is amazing for beginners. And they just have a super intuitive, super easy to use product that I highly recommend. And again, I don't like recommending stuff that I don't use, but I spend money with Libsyn and Buzzsprout every month, as do a bunch of my clients. I have used SoundCloud in the past. They are good. They're more geared towards music, but you can host your podcast with them. And then, of course, there's Anchor, which isn't listed here. And Anchor is an app that you can get on your iPhone. And I believe you can also get it on Android. And you can host your app. You can host your podcast with Anchor. You can record it right there on your phone, and Anchor will deliver it right. Anchor acts as the host and delivers it right out, pushes it out to all the different places where you would share your podcast. So, and just to be very clear, this is where your podcast lives. It lives here, but then it does something else. And I'm going to show you on this next page. So you have all these hosting sites, and I just talked about some of these. Then you have the directories, right? Because you don't find out about a podcast through Libsyn or through Podbean or Buzzsprout. You find out about a podcast through a podcast directory. So you see the top three there. The one on the left with the purple is Apple. That's Apple Podcasts. Then you've got Google Podcasts, and then you have Spotify. Those are the three main ones. But now you have iHeartRadio, which is huge, TuneIn, Simplecast, Stitcher. I mean, the list goes on and on. There are a ton of podcast directories where you want to host, where you want to have your hosted podcast shows poured into. So, for instance, when I record a show for I Am Northwest Arkansas, Libsyn is my host. I record the show, I upload it to Libsyn. Libsyn then sends it out through what's called a real simple syndication feed, or RSS feed, directly to these different podcast directories. So all of these podcast directories, I have my podcast listed with them. And Libsyn sets it up so that I can easily set it up with those guys. And Buzzsprout does an even better job connecting the dots between the host and the podcast directories. And that's the thing that I like about Buzzsprout, because for a beginner, it's a place that you can go. And if any of you are interested in checking out Buzzsprout, I have a really special deal that I can share with you offline. I'll just send it to you via email, and it'll just give you like a $25 Amazon discount to get started with Buzzsprout. But trust me when I say this, they give you like 3 months free just to try it out to see if you like it. But I know the guys there. It's a great company. They've been around since 2009. They know what they're doing, and they do an excellent job at it. So, but yeah, you want to have your podcast you want to have your podcast listed everywhere it can be listed. Because even Google now, if you notice, Google, when you do a search for a podcast, Google will give you an instant reading right at the top of the search results. So that way you have that information there. And Spotify is kind of working on that. And of course, Apple is Apple, and they're always going to be at the top. And people are always going to say, well, what are your Apple reviews like? And people always ask for reviews for their podcast show. And most of the time they're concerned with reviews on Apple Podcasts, because that's still the big kid on the block. TuneIn works, and TuneIn directly, when you post with or have your podcast listed with TuneIn, that automatically pushes your podcast out to Amazon Echo. So like if you go right now to Amazon Echo, if you have an Amazon Echo at home and you say, hey, Alexa, play the latest episode of, and fill in the blank of your favorite podcast, you should be able to do that. So like, for instance, if you do that for me, for I Am Northwest Arkansas, you say, hey, Alexa, play the latest I Am Northwest Arkansas app. It'll play the so that's kind of how you're able to use these directories, and it kind of works out from there. So I think that hold on, I heard something with the microphone. Just want to make sure it's working okay. Okay, all right, my mic is okay. So those are some of the directories and some of the podcast hosting sites where you can actually host your podcast. And you don't really need to get into the nitty and the gritty of these. It's pretty straightforward. Like I said, Buzzsprout, regardless of who you choose. And again, I can only speak with authority about Buzzsprout and Libsyn because I use them, and I use them on a regular basis. And I hate recommending stuff that I don't use, but I know people that use Podbean and they swear by it. I know people that use Megaphone and Simplecast and they swear by it. So I'm not saying that any of those aren't great, but I can speak with authority about Libsyn and Buzzsprout, and they work as advertised. As do most of them though. So just take that for what it's worth. I think it's just good for you to be aware of that. All right. So I want to make sure that we have some time left here. Let's see. And why am I not able to? Okay, hold on 1 second. See if I can. Okay. So what will be available at FPL, or Fayetteville Public Library? I just call it FPL. That's my thing. So what will be available at FPL when the extension is opened, and Lord knows when that will be, but at the time of recording this, it's still not open yet, but it will be soon. And so I know that David and the rest of his amazing team at the Fayetteville Public Library will have these things open as soon as humanly possible, when we know it's all safe for everybody to be in there. So if you're listening to this after the fact and the library is open, you need to go check it out and just take a tour, check it out, see all the new sights and sounds and just all the different things that they're going to have there. But they're going to have a number of new items. One of the things that they're going to have, which is up in the top corner, are these LK multimedia rigs. I think it's IK multimedia rigs. It's a video creator HD. It's an all-in-one streaming setup for your smartphone, and that allows you to stream. That little red thing there is where your smartphone would be held, and it would be held on a landscape basis. And then you've got a microphone there. You've got a ring light, which is amazing. So you can not only record the podcast, but you can record the video version of it. And here's the thing, don't get caught up. If you record a video, you can strip the audio out of it and use it as a podcast. So don't, there's a lot of, I have friends that their whole podcast episodes were videos. They stripped the audio out as well and then made it a podcast. So don't get too caught up on it. So like that gentleman below, that's using that's the Marantz Professional Turret Broadcaster video streaming system. That system will be in the library. It will be available to utilize for individuals that are doing a podcast and want to get the full complement of equipment. The nice thing about both of these is that one, you need your phone. The other has a camera built into it, and you'll be able to connect that to your computer and be able to I would say not rent out, but take out or borrow one of the sound rooms to do your podcasting or video recording, which is really cool. And all of that's going to be available to you. And then, of course, this last one is Zoom. Zoom is a great company. I use the Zoom H6 digital recorder, which I take out in the field with me all the time. But this right here is an all-in-one 4K video recorder. The sound on this thing is amazing. So you could borrow one of these from the library and go out in the field and interview somebody with this, and you'd be surprised at the sound. Or you could be playing guitar, and it's gonna, I mean, the acoustics are amazing. And I've actually pulled up a few reference links for you to check out to learn more about these devices so that you can understand how to use them a little bit better. But here's the thing, YouTube has everything for all of these devices. So you can really, learn more about them. And I would encourage you to do that. They're going to also have these isolation booths at the Fayetteville Public Library expansion. Now, this is not an exact picture of the expansion booth, but I wanted to give you an idea of what they're going to be doing. Again, these can be checked out. They can be reserved like a normal meeting room, and you will be able to reserve them online. So that's kind of cool. I already told David, I need to get one with my name on it, and I'll be down there and to use it quite a bit. I'm being funny because I'm sure everybody and their mother's going to want to use these things. And I actually have my own system at home, but there are a lot of ways for you to isolate sound and get quality sound. I actually sometimes go to open venues, and with the right proper microphones and the proper recording equipment, you'd be surprised at how much you can control the sound around you. And that's the beauty of audio editing, which is why I wish I could go deeper into that. But the focus of this particular Zoom meeting is so that you could get an introduction. But there are other opportunities. There will be other opportunities for us to go deeper on the sound side of it. And I'm not even a sound. I mean, I love sound. I like sound, but I'm not even a sound expert. I just know what sounds good. And I've done this for long enough time that, when I put stuff out, it's not going to be offensive to anybody. And each one of us has to learn a little bit about the sound piece so that we can be informed and make decisions ourselves when we ultimately finally put podcasting products out so that the world can listen to. Because I got to say this, like video with sound, if it's really, really bad, like you could be talking, like I've listened to interviews with people where they had challenges with the sound, but because the interview was so amazing, I looked past the sound deficiencies because the quality of the content was all that. That does not happen in video. It only happens in audio. I don't know why it does, but I've listened to some podcast episodes where the audio was less than stellar, but the content was 100% amazing. So keep that in mind as you go out and do this. But it's really not that difficult for you to easily manipulate sound and understand where you are. If you're in a room with a carpet, that sound is going to be absorbed by that carpet, which is a good thing, versus a room with all glass windows and a solid floor. That sound is going to be bouncing off of everything. So you have to keep in mind what that looks like when you are recording your podcast. And again, that's really topics and information for another type of program, but just to kind of give you an idea of what to understand. But if you have access to these isolation booths that the library will have through the expansion, this will solve a lot of your problems. So keep that in mind. And I'm excited for this, and I'm just excited about everything that the library is doing. I mean, it's just, I got to say, I moved here 2014, like I said earlier, the Fayetteville Public Library. I lived in Boston for 17 years. So, of course, we have the first library in Boston. But the Fayetteville Public Library, hands down, is the best library I've ever been in my life. And I'm not just saying that because they asked me to come on this podcast or come on this program. I'm just saying it because I've been all over the country. I've lived all over the world. Best library I've ever experienced, with the greatest employees as well. So, all right, enough of that. Let's move on. So some additional references are here for you. You guys can take a look at these. And what I'll see if I can do is maybe we can cut and paste these into the the comment section, but these are some of the kits that I use for podcasting, the kits that I use for vlogging and live streaming. And there's 2 links on here for 2 YouTube videos, one for the Zoom Q2N. I watched that video. It's really, really good. Really good. I mean, he kind of goes through a number of different reviews of this particular product, but I wanted you to see that, obviously people are talking about some of this equipment that the library is going to have. And this is the library has spent some good money on bringing this equipment in. So I would encourage you to take advantage of it and figure out how you can use that. And of course, I'm going to give you my contact information. So if any of this doesn't transfer, if you don't get it, you can check in with me, and I'll just make sure that I have it for you so that you can have it. So I apologize about that. So I wanted to answer any questions that anybody has. We have about 10 minutes left according to the time, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. You may have something to do. I do have an event to go to later on this afternoon, but I do want to take a few minutes to answer any questions. So if you guys could open up the channels and folks can talk away. If people are still here, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. And if I don't know the answer, I'll be the first to tell you I don't know the answer, but I'll get it for you.
I actually have a question. I think everybody that wants to be unmuted is unmuted at this point.
Okay.
I just wanted I think you already told us, sorry, allergies. You said Buzzsprout and
Yes.
Libsyn were the 2 best hosts in your experience.
Yes. That's more than a decade of experience. And like I said, I've literally been working with Libsyn since 2009. I mean, those guys are above reproach. But if you're going to host your podcast somewhere, you really need to make sure that they are a viable host. And everybody that I've listed that I showed on this presentation, they're all viable, solid hosts. So highly recommend any one of those. Buzzsprout, in terms of the audience that I'm currently speaking with right now, if I had to pick one or the other, I would probably steer you towards Buzzsprout just for its ease of use. So it gives you all your podcast stats. It's just a little bit more intuitive to upload your podcast and to then make it available to the world. And they've added a lot of extra bells and whistles that don't quite come with Libsyn, because Libsyn's a little bit more Spartan in their approach, but very robust. So, so I would recommend either of those. But for this particular group, if I had to press you on one, I would say Buzzsprout. And if you want I have a link that I can share with you guys, so you can email me and I'll send you that link for Buzzsprout to get set up, and they'll give you a special deal where you'll get like a couple of months for free and some other stuff. And I even think you get a Amazon gift card. It's like $25. So, but I don't really push that stuff. It's just, if you decide you want to do it, great. But regardless, you need to have a good podcast host. So.
Hi, Randy. I have a quick question on my end.
Yes, sir.
And it's more about format, like just setting up the podcast. I don't know how you do it for yours, but like in terms of like a season, right? Whenever you do a podcast, I know that like you want to be consistently uploading like shows and programming, right?
Right. Exactly.
But how would you handle like, is there a way that you kind of divide that up to give yourself a break between
that's a good question. So the way that I give myself a break, for instance, and I'll speak specifically to the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast. With that podcast, the way that I give myself a break is sometimes when I batch produce a number of episodes, I will do like 4 or 5 episodes in the span of like 2 days. And then I've got a break for a month, right? Theoretically, because I wouldn't have to. Now, I don't wait until the last minute to do an episode. Every now and then I will, or I'll just share an episode. Like I have a bunch of episodes that are in the hopper waiting to go out. that I'm going to share at different times. I had a bunch of episodes that I recorded right before the pandemic happened, right? I interviewed the folks at XNA. I interviewed a couple of companies, and I interviewed Theater Squared. And I can't put those out right now because nobody can go to the theater or to the airport for the most part. So yeah, you have that to deal with. But to answer your question, so like for instance, with I Am Northwest Arkansas, I'm still technically in season 1. My season, I've decided for Northwest Arkansas is going to be 100 episodes. So when I get to 100 episodes, that will be one season. Now that's a lot. Like normally you would be like 52, but I just decided to do that because I did a bunch of episodes just to get out of the gate. And that's the other thing that I recommend is that when you're going to do a podcast, I had like when I started with I Am Northwest Arkansas, I launched with like 10 episodes because if your podcast is even halfway decent, people are going to be like, oh man, what, is there more? So, you want to do that. So I think that might be, that's a decent way to approach it. But there's no right or wrong way. The only thing that I would say is that if you're going to take time off, just tell your audience you're taking time off and tell them when they can expect to come back, because you could fall into the netherworlds, right? I mean, people would be like, well, what happened to the podcast? I love this podcast. What happened? He just disappeared. So like, for instance, when I did a podcast for my old company, we did a podcast, and every summer in August, I would, for the 4 weeks of August, just to kind of take a break, I would then do the top 4 podcasts requested that time frame. These were the top downloaded podcasts, and then I would replay those. So again, you have flexibility, right? There's no book out there that says, oh, you've got to do it this way or you've got to do it that way. Do the way that makes sense for your audience, right? And I would say communicate with your audience. And I communicate with my audience all the time and tell them, hey, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. But yeah, for the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast, it's episodic. It's each week is a different episode, and they expect it to come out every Monday. If I don't come out with an episode on Monday, I'm screwed. So that's just the way that it is. Now, I might go down the road and do like a best of the best, and I'll share that episode, but it'll still come out on Monday when it's supposed to. And I may tell people in advance, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm doing a best of the best episode next week. Check it out. I'm doing this one. This episode was downloaded the most or whatever. And you just do that. That's how you do it. But even like I have friends like Aaron Mankey that does lore and Cabinet of Curiosities. Even those guys, they take breaks, but they tell people up front. So you tell your listener what you're going to do, and then your listener will know. They'll say, oh, okay, so I'll come back in 2 weeks. Great. That's what I'll do. So I highly recommend that you be vocal about it. It's not a TV show. You're not the NBC networks. Don't obsess about it. And really, nobody has written a rule book on this. So you actually kind of create the rules as far as that's concerned. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that helps a lot. Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else have a question? Something that's burning, you just want to get out?
Hey, Randy, I have a question.
Yes.
And maybe this kind of ties into formatting, which thanks for answering that question. I think that was great. Answered a lot of my questions. And maybe this is the, $1 million question. Maybe this is what makes or breaks different podcasts, like you said, because some will go for one season or even whatever is, maybe like 10 episodes or less, and they just kind of fizzle out. And so I guess the question is like, you kind of mentioned this earlier about, make sure you're passionate about it. Otherwise you will burn out. But what if things start to transform? And I guess Aaron Mankey is a good example of that because he has so many different podcasts. So he's so if things start to transform where he has short form, long form, he's kind of split that up in different podcasts. But I'm curious, like, how do you, I guess, keep things interesting while still keeping the same format? Does that make sense?
It does. And that's actually why I am personally, like I said, for this, and I'm speaking for me, but you're right. That's why I actually asked Aaron this when I saw him last year. That's why he created Cabinet of Curiosities, because, the long form, like there's so much work that goes into creating an episode of lore.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of work. And if you've heard it, you know what I'm talking about. So
Oh, yes.
Cabinet of Curiosities, he has a bunch of researchers, and they are just researching and shredding a bunch of different ideas for a bunch of different stories to tell in that shorter format. And that affords them then the ability to focus on lore at the same time, but do it in a different way. And they're not under the same pressure. So then I don't know if he has modified his delivery of lore, but I do know that I think Cabinet of Curiosities comes out once or twice a week. But
Yeah,
my kids absolutely love it. And, we're constantly listening to it, but we listen to the old stuff too. That's the other thing, that when you create a good product, people listen to the old stuff too. So, I mean, my answer to that is, I think it's really just going to depend on you and your audience and what your time frame is and how you can work it out. But again, because it is audio, not everybody, there's very few things that I absolutely have to listen to when they come out. The only two shows that I listen to when they come out are Up Next and The Daily. Everything else is all time shifted. Like as soon as the Daily hits in the morning, I'm listening to it. As soon as Up Next listening to it. And that's how I get my news, because I don't normally watch the news per se. I listen to those podcasts. So those like when they don't come out, or like there was like one glitch that they had and it was a delay, the Daily didn't come out until like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And I was like, oh my God, what's wrong? But that's because my expectancy was that thing was going to hit first thing at 7 o'clock in the morning. Right. And when it doesn't, then you're like, oh my God, why, what's wrong with the podcast? Is something going on? So I think you just have to, with anything like with this, you just manage people's expectations. So what the other podcast that I was talking about, this Wide Letter podcast that I did for my old firm, I would tell people like the month of July, I would say, hey, coming up in August, the top listener requested episodes, we're going to share 4 of them throughout that month. So every Thursday you were going to get a new episode. You just let people know. And then once you do that, that's that. And I think the easiest way for you to buy yourself some time, if you need to take a break or whatever, is to definitely poll your audience, find out what really resonates with them, and then reshare some of that. Because that's when, you'll get some more people that might just jump in and start listening. And they're like, oh my God, they listen, to one of your best episodes. And that's kind of what gets them hooked. And then they go back and listen to everything else. Because that's what I do. I don't know about you guys listening to this, but when I discover a new podcast, I will listen to it. Then I'll go back and start listening to all the old ones and then, try to work my way up. And it just depends. But that's, to me, is the beauty of podcasting, is that you have a lot more control over it than you think. But I always recommend that you just be very open with your audience and let them know what you're doing, and they'll be cool with it. So.
Cool. Thank you so much.
No problem. No problem. My pleasure. Anybody else have a question?
Last chance. This is it.
This is it. Well, and I'm sure though, and for those that are watching this that are watching this Zoom, you certainly can email me with any questions that you have, and there is no meter running, so it won't cost you a dime to ask me a question. Whatever I can do. This is just something that I'm passionate about, so whatever I can do to help you out, I'll be more than happy to do that. And this is how anybody can kind of stay in touch with me. That's my email address. And those are 2 of my Instagram accounts that you can follow and check me out at. And then that's my Twitter. But I'll whatever questions that you have, whatever help that you need, I'm more than happy to share whatever I can with you, and kind of go from there. But I hope this was helpful. I really, really, really do appreciate everybody taking time out of their Sunday afternoon to spend an hour and a half with me. I do apologize about a couple of the glitches in the matrix that happen, but that does happen from time to time. So as most of us have been stuck in our homes on Zoom calls, some are a little bit more informing than others. And I hope that this was definitely an informing call. And I do apologize for any of the slight issues that we had. So I want to thank you so much for participating and hanging out with me.
Thank you so much for doing this for us. It was wonderful.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. So I think that's it. And I will say sayonara. And then I believe that this will be accessible on the Fayetteville Public Library website through some of their virtual learning programs. There's all kinds of programs. So I really encourage all of you guys to take advantage of what the library has available. You can take cooking lessons. A good friend of mine, Heather A. Tripe, has done some online cooking classes. So there's all kinds of options for you at the Fayetteville Public Library. That's all I have for today. I'm
Look on
signing out.
our YouTube page and our Facebook.
Right.
Not
right.
straight away. We have to get this from A to B, but
Right.
they'll be there eventually.
Okay. Perfect. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you, Randy.
No problem. Thank you.